Welcome to RevAI Real Talk, where we cover real go-to-market and smarter revenue strategies harnessing the power of AI. If you're leading go-to-market right now, you're probably feeling a lot of pressure from a lot of directions all at once. Markets are tighter, buyers are harder to move, revenue teams are being asked to do more with less, and at the same time, AI is raising the stakes on how fast teams are expected to adapt. And that's what we're here to talk about, to cut through the noise, make sense of what truly matters, and help you turn revenue AI into practical, usable go-to-market decisions. And in this episode, we're tackling one of the biggest reasons so many teams still feel stuck. More tools, more friction. And here's the trap many revenue teams are in right now. Every function has a good reason to add another tool. Marketing wants sharper targeting. SDR leaders want more activity. Sales wants better deal progression and cleaner forecasting. RevOps wants stronger data trust, cleaner routing, and less manual patchwork. Individually, all of that sounds rational. But when you add it all together, instead of getting a motion that's cleaner, most often you get one that's just noisier. More platforms, more alerts, more dashboards, more AI, and somehow less flow. That is when teams need to stop asking, what else should we buy? And start asking, what exactly are we trying to design here? Because most companies do not actually have a tool problem, they have a system problem. And that matters right now because AI is pouring fuel on top of whatever operating reality you currently have. And if the underlying motion is clear, well, great. AI can help you move faster. But if the underlying motion is fragmented, well, not so great. Now AI just helps you create more fragmented activity at a higher speed with more confidence than you probably deserve. So in this episode, I want to make one argument as clearly as possible. A revenue stack is not the same thing as a revenue system. And if you're serious about revenue AI, pipeline quality, and getting your go-to-market teams to stop missing or even tripping over each other, that distinction matters more than most teams realize. And by the end of this episode, you'll have 3 practical tools you can take back right into your business. A simple 6-layer system map to help you see the whole picture, a stack to system audit checklist to help you spot where the friction really lives, and one exact prompt you can use with AI as your thought partner to go from tool sprawl to system design. And when people talk about tool sprawl, they usually frame it like a budget problem. Too many licenses, too much overlap, too much shelfware. That part is real, but the more important cost is operational. It is that quiet, everyday drag that builds up when the system is not designed. It shows up when marketing sees engagement, sales sees opportunity, and RevOps sees a data event. And it shows up when a handoff becomes a Teams or a Slack message instead of a real designed workflow. And it shows up when routing logic lives in one person's head, and it shows up when managers spend time inspecting the noise instead of the actual reality. That noise being things like inconsistent signal interpretations, manual handoffs, and tribal knowledge for the routing logic. These are the parts teams often underestimate because on paper, the stack can still look pretty impressive. You can have strong logos in the environment, you can have modern tooling, you can have AI pilots running, and meanwhile, you can still have a go-to-market motion that feels harder than it looks or than it actually should be. And that's your biggest clue. When execution feels heavier after you've modernized it, well, something is off, right? Not because the tools are bad, but because the design is weak. Think of a stack as a collection of the tools you have. And then think of a system as the logic for how work, decisions, signals, and ownership not only move through the stack, but through your business. A system has cross-team flow, it has sequencing, it has understood handoffs, and it has feedback loops. And more importantly, it has someone who knows what's supposed to happen next. So even when a stack looks modern, it's not the stack, but the system that will actually work. Now here's why I believe so many teams are feeling pretty frustrated right now. They're trying to solve execution friction by adding capability, when the real issue is that those capabilities were never turned into a coherent motion in the first place. It's a bit like adding more roads and shortcuts because every neighborhood wants to improve its own commute. Now, that sounds smart locally, but if nobody's designing the city as a whole, well, you don't get speed, you get traffic. And AI in that picture is like your GPS. GPS is very useful. It can help you find the best route available, but it cannot fix a city with broken traffic flow and bad urban planning. So when the whole system's jammed, GPS does not create flow, it just helps you navigate the congestion a little bit more efficiently. And that is what many teams are doing right now. They're layering AI onto a motion that's still structurally broken. So instead of getting real acceleration, they get more activity, more output, and usually more noise, a lot of city traffic. So this is not just an internal efficiency conversation. Buyers are forcing the issue too. Modern B2B buying doesn't behave in the neat linear way around which many go-to-market motions are still built. B2B buying is multi-threaded, it's cross-channel, it's self-directed for long stretches, and it involves multiple stakeholders at different times. So if your go-to-market motion still operates as if one person filling out one form should act as the master record of reality, you're going to lose the plot very quickly. Here's what that looks like in practice. One person from the account attends a webinar. Another person visits your pricing page. A third replies to outbound. A fourth shows up in product usage. A fifth never engages at all, but that stakeholder has veto power later. When your system treats those as isolated lead events, you don't have the buyer story, and you barely even have the account story. And that's why the account view matters so much more now. Not because account-based is fashionable, not because every company needs to become a perfectly mature ABM machine overnight. It's because the account is the only object big enough to hold what's actually happening in a complex buying environment. The account is where signals start to make sense together, and it's where ownership becomes clearer, where orchestration truly becomes possible, and where measurement gets closest to actual reality. So when I say revenue teams need a system, it's not about adopting a prettier architecture diagram. It's about a go-to-market motion that aligns with how B2B buying works now. And if your internal system can absorb anonymous research, aka the dark funnel, along with partial intent, fragmented engagement, stakeholder complexity, and timed human follow-up, you'll know because your buyers are going to expose that weakness for you, and fast. Look, there's no shortage of motion, but there's definitely a shortage of connected motion, meaning a lot is happening, but not enough of it is being translated into the right next action at the right time with the right owner. And that is a system issue. And once you stop looking at your environment as a pile of tools, the landscape gets easier to read. Because instead of seeing logos in your tool stack, you start seeing layers, and each layer has a job. An effective go-to-market system primarily has these 6 layers. There's the foundation. On top of that, you have the upstream intelligence layer. Then there's the bridge capabilities layer. Next, the midstream engagement layer, over to the downstream execution layer. And across it all, there's of course the AI layer. Now let's walk through each layer. The first layer is foundation. This is where your truth layer and where your CRM, data model, integrations, governance, permissions, and reporting logic all live. Definitely not glamorous, but absolutely decisive. Think of the foundation as your truth layer. At the same time, it stands to be your truth slayer, meaning if the foundation is messy, well, every layer above it gets noisier. And this is where leaders make a very expensive mistake with AI. They assume AI will somehow compensate for bad truth. Usually it does not, and usually it amplifies it. If the account structure is sloppy, if the life cycle definitions are fuzzy, if ownership is unclear, then AI won't magically help you make sound decisions. Worse, it'll help you create faster confusion. Okay, on to the second layer, which is your upstream intelligence. This layer helps you understand where to focus and why now. What accounts matter? What signals matter? Where's the buying stage movement? And where's the early heat? Now, this is the world of account selection, intent, behavioral clues, first-party signals, research, and prioritization. And the real question here is not, do we have signals? Most teams do. The real question is, are those signals getting translated into focused action, or are they just becoming another dashboard? That takes us to the third layer, which I think deserves far more attention than it normally gets. Bridge capabilities. This is the connective tissue. This is where raw intelligence becomes execution ready. So here you have enrichment, normalization, deduplication, my favorite, lead to account matching, segmentation, routing logic, workflow orchestration, and activation. This is the layer that answers the most operationally important question in revenue AI. How does a signal actually become actionable? I mean, not theoretically, but literally. For instance, what happens after a target account shows a surge in engagement? What happens after a pricing page visit from a target account? And what happens after product usage spikes? Or what happens after an opportunity starts to stall? If those answers are unclear or vague, then you know your bridge is weak. And if the bridge is weak, the rest of the system will look busier than it is effective. All right, let's move on to the fourth layer, which is midstream engagement. Now, this is where the buyer experiences your go-to-market motion, where activities like inbound conversion, outbound engagement, calls, meetings, and rep workflows are happening. This is also where most teams overfocus. Why? Because it feels closest to action. But this layer depends on everything upstream, meaning if the context is bad, the lists are bad. If the matching is bad, the target's wrong. If the routing is bad, the response is late. And if ownership is fuzzy, well, everyone hesitates. So when your midstream tools feel disappointing, the issue is often not the tool in front of the rep, it's the design of the layers feeding it. Okay, then you have downstream execution. This is where the system becomes operationally accountable, where you have pipeline inspection, deal health, progression, forecast confidence, coaching, and enablement. This is where the business decides whether it's learning from execution or simply reporting on it. And finally, across all of this, you have the AI layer. This is an important distinction. AI is not just another layer of tooling, it's better understood as a multiplier across the whole system. This AI can support research, it can support enrichment and qualification, it can support decision-making, workflow execution, automation, and forecasting. But the quality of that support still depends on context, trust, and system design. When data hygiene is strong and the motion is clear, AI accelerates the system. When the inputs are messy and the operating logic is weak, like I love to say, AI will just help you move faster in circles. That is the 6-layer map. And once you see it that way, the conversation changes completely. You stop asking whether your stack is modern. Instead, you start asking whether the system is designed. Now, let's stay on the bridge for a minute, because this is where much of the go-to-market drag is actually hiding. Most teams naturally obsess over 3 things: signals, engagement tools, and AI. Well, okay, that makes sense. Signals feel strategic, engagement tools feel tangible, and AI feels urgent. Meanwhile, the bridge? Well, the bridge feels operational. So it's the one that gets underestimated. Yet this is where some of your biggest breakdowns live, because good signals don't create pipeline by themselves. They have to be translated into execution-ready inputs. Let me make that more concrete. Let's say a target account shows intent on something relevant. 2 people from that account visit your site. One looks at pricing, another attends a webinar. A rep gets an email reply from yet another person in the buying group. And meanwhile, a current opportunity from that same account starts to slip. This is not a signal problem. The signals are there. The real problem is translation. Can your system connect those moments to the same account story? Can it normalize the data fast enough? Can it determine who should act? And can it help the team see whether this is an outbound activation play, an inbound conversion play, or is it a deal risk play? And finally, can it route that context into the right workflow? Because if it cannot, the signals simply die as interesting information instead of being translated into a fuller account story and turned into commercial action. And that is the bridge failure. That's why bridge work matters so much, even though it's the least glamorous part of the system. In practice, this layer usually follows a simple 6-step sequence. First, enrichment. Do you have enough account and contact or lead context to be useful? Then, Normalization and deduplication. Are you cleaning the mess before it compounds? Next, matching. Are you connecting this activity to the right account story? Beyond lead to account matching, mind the domain name consistency and account hierarchies because those can be real CRM gotchas. Then, routing and ownership. Do we know who's on first and who should act? Next, activation. Can you push the right trigger or task into the systems where work actually happens? And then, measurement. Did the signal lead to action? And did the action lead to an outcome? That's not just operations plumbing, that's commercial leverage. Because when that sequence is weak, everything downstream gets weaker. Sellers work bad lists, inbound gets routed poorly, marketing loses trust in activation, managers coach from partial information, and AI agents fire with incomplete context. Now, even when teams understand the layers, they often make one more mistake. Many assume that once the architecture is all mapped out, the hard part is done. Spoiler alert, it's not even close. In fact, this is where the real work begins, because technology gives you the infrastructure, but your operating model determines whether that infrastructure actually works. And that is the real work. It's the work of deciding how the system actually runs, who owns what, how handoffs happen, what gets measured, how teams know when to act, and what good execution is supposed to look like. And in practice, there are two big things that determine whether that operating model holds. The first is ownership and execution clarity. So instead of asking which team owns this tool between the business owner and the tech owner, the better question is, which layer of the system is this tool serving? And what role does each team play there? Because once you organize around system layers, ownership gets much clearer. Marketing and ABM are usually strongest in upstream intelligence. RevOps and marketing ops are usually strongest in the foundation and bridge layers. SDRs and BDRs and sales live most directly in midstream engagement. Sales leadership, enablement, and ops typically converge in downstream execution. And the AI layer usually needs cross-functional governance because trust, security, quality, and commercial execution all intersect there. And that is the first test of whether the operating model is actually working. Do people know their role, their handoff, and their responsibility inside the system? All right, the second is measurement. Each layer will always have local metrics. That's normal. In upstream intelligence, you might look at signal quality. In the bridge, you might look at match rates and routing accuracy. In midstream engagement, you might look at response rates and meeting conversion. And in downstream execution, you're looking at progression and forecast confidence. The issue is not that those metrics exist. The issue is what happens when those local metrics do not ladder into shared outcomes. That is when marketing can hit its number, while sales complains about quality. That is when SDRs can crush activity, while pipeline stays flat. That is when RevOps can improve hygiene, while managers still do not trust what they're looking at. So the goal is not to eliminate layer level metrics. The goal is to make sure they connect to shared progression. And this is where alignment gets overused and underdefined. Real alignment doesn't live in org charts. It shows up in plays: an in-market account play, an inbound conversion play, an outbound activation play, a deal risk intervention play, and a renewal or expansion play. This is where the operating model becomes real. That is where the bottle diagram turns into emotion and you have a system that starts to really move. All right, everything in sixes today. Here's the 6-question gut check I would use with any revenue team. Question 1, can your teams clearly explain which signals trigger action and which signals are intentionally ignored? Not we use intent. I mean, specifically, what do you do with pricing page visits? What do you do with stakeholder gaps? What do you do with demo requests from already open accounts? And what do you do with stage slippage? Question 2, is the account object truly the organizing object in your go-to-market motion? Or are you still mostly counting and managing disconnected leads and hoping they'll eventually reconcile in a meaningful commercial story? Question 3, can people explain in plain English how a signal becomes action? For instance, when a signal comes in, does it get tied to the right account? Does the right team know it's theirs to act on? And does the play get triggered while the outcome is captured and measured? And question 4, is your bridge layer mature enough to operationalize intelligence? Meaning, is enrichment working? Is matching reliable? Does routing make sense? And can activation happen fast enough to matter? Question 5, are your engagement tools part of a coherent system? Or are they just isolated work surfaces that happen to sit near the rep? And question 6, is AI doing something concrete inside your system, or is it still mostly a collection of disconnected experiments or tools? That's the difference. A stat can stay very busy, and a system becomes accountable. Busy is not the goal. Accountability is the goal. So what do you actually do with all this? Well, the good news is it's not about trying to boil the ocean. It's just about taking a moment to step back and stop layering new tools on top of an unclear design. If I were walking into a revenue team right now, I would start with these 5 moves. First, I'd map every current tool to a system layer. If a tool does not clearly map, that's useful information because it might be redundant, it might be orphaned, or it might be doing work nobody actually defined. Second, make the account the organizing object for signals, ownership, orchestration, and measurement. Even if you're still running a hybrid model, that one move improves a surprising amount downstream. Third, I'd strengthen the foundation and bridge before adding any more AI. Not because that work's glamorous, but because that's the work that makes everything else function. And fourth, I define 2 or 3 core plays and instrument them end to end. Not 20 plays, 2 or 3 motions that really matter, like an in-market account play, an inbound conversion play, a deal risk play, something real. And fifth, I'd align ownership and metrics around those plays, not around isolated leads or tools. And that's how the operating model starts to catch up to the technology. And if you're earlier in your journey, don't overcomplicate the first step. Usually the first 90 days land in one of a few places. You either need better signal visibility, better trust in truth layers, one high friction workflow redesigned, or clear leadership alignment around priorities and ownership. That's enough to start. You do not need to finish the whole revenue AI picture. You just need to reduce the drag in the system, and that's where momentum will come from. So let's recap. The future advantage in revenue AI is not simply having more software, and it's certainly not more reports and dashboards, or more automation for the sake of automation, and it's definitely not more pilots because the category's hot. Your future advantage with revenue AI is building a system where signals, teams, workflows, and execution all move in sync, and that's the real leverage. Not more activity, just better design. Not more moving parts in the stack, just more clarity in the motion. And not more isolated intelligence, just more accountable action. So while a stack can look convincing, a system is your real ticket to creating flow. And right now, most revenue teams do not need one more tool. They need the courage to admit the stack is not yet a system, and then the discipline to work together and design one. If this is the conversation your team needs to be having, then simply mention system in the comments below and grab the free Stack to System audit checklist that we have. It's a simpler way to map what you have, identify which layers are weak, and spot whether the real issue is tool count, bridge layer drag, or cross-team alignment gaps. Because once you know which layer is weak and where the friction actually lives, you can stop treating symptoms and start fixing the part of the system that's holding revenue back. And now that you know how to separate tool sprawl from system design, you can take this back into your own business and use AI as your thought partner to help diagnose the friction, pressure test your thinking, and identify your smartest first move. So before we close, here's the prompt you can take into ChatGPT, Claude, or whichever AI tool you're using. And here it is. Act as a B2B go-to-market systems advisor. Help me diagnose whether our revenue friction is primarily caused by tool sprawl, bridge layer drag, or cross-team alignment gaps. Use the 6-layer system map as your lens. Foundation, upstream intelligence, bridge capabilities, midstream engagement, downstream execution, and AI cross-layer. First, ask me the clarifying questions you need, then identify the weakest layer, explain why, and recommend the 3 highest leverage actions for the next 90 days. Okay, so you'll also find the full version inside the Stack to System Audit, and be sure to upload it into your prompt to give your AI more context about the layers and the system design. If you're serious about upgrading your revenue engine and harnessing AI in a way that actually improves execution, then be sure to subscribe to the channel for more practical revenue AI insights to help you reduce go-to-market friction, create better pipeline flow, and drive more predictable revenue. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.